Okay, let's go to, if there's nothing else, we'll move on to the laws. The law or laws, these are covenant stipulations for Israel. Now, the paperwork is short, so I'm going to supplement a good bit just by talking. Instead of us doing this and Psalms in one Sunday, we'll just take it slowly on this one. I think that's okay. And if we finish a little early, that's also okay. So, to be real clear first, that law can be translated law, but it means different things. So, I'll use the word law. The problem with the word law is we often think it means a rule that can't be broken. Like it's the law not to drive past the speed limit, a law not to drive on the left side of the road. And some things spoken of in the Old Testament, quote, laws, fit that category. Other things do not. So sometimes the language itself is misleading in our American English, but I'll unpack that as we go along. So point number one, God gave the Israelites, I'll call it the law, the Mosaic law, as a gift. The Jews considered it a gift. In general, they sure did. They were upset they couldn't follow it perfectly, but it was a gift by God, the God of the universe, to establish the proper moral behavior they were to have in community with one another. So think of God being, bear with me, like a godly parent who says, this is how I want you to treat your siblings. Here are the ground rules. Letter B, to establish proper worship of Yahweh. Worship means to demonstrate loyalty toward. To demonstrate loyalty toward. It does not mean sing songs to. One of the ways they could demonstrate loyalty to Yahweh was to sing songs to Him. They often use another word. The Hebrew eludes me right now. In Greek, it's proskuneo. It means to bow down. In the Latin, it's genuflectio, to genuflect. So it can mean bow down toward, get on knee. Sometimes use a different Hebrew and Greek word that means to serve. They're all used synonymously in the Psalms to, we might call worship, serve, bow down to, genuflect, demonstrate obeisance or servitude, inferiority to God. And so the law is a way to say, this is what it looks like for you to pay me loyalty and homage. And I don't have this here, I should have. Why? Because the law established Yahweh as king. You need to always remember that. That's why they, quote, worship Yahweh. That is to say, that's why they gave loyalty to Yahweh alone. Because they understood God, Yahweh, God the Father, to be their reigning ultimate capital K king. Now, the capital K king could establish earthly kings, and through the earthly king, they paid loyalty to what he said because they thought God had established that king. But that king was supposed to do what the heavenly king said and did. And when they didn't, the prophets were sent in to go, stop, you're sinning, you're not doing the right thing. So the law is how I treat one another in the covenant community. I didn't say Christians yet. Those who have a covenant community in Judaism. 2, how do I act like Yahweh is my king? How do I show my loyalty to Him? And C, to establish proper boundaries between their community and their neighbors. Those people over there in the Ponzit, they worship a different God. Those people over there in Canaan, they have loyalty to a different god, Baal, the storm god of fertility, rain god. That god over there, that people group, they worship a different group altogether called Tiamat. They're Egyptians. They have a very different understanding of their gods. But if you go to that land in a place called Israel, Palestine area, or Judah in the south, they look and smell and act differently. Some things are very similar. Some things are very different. And the distinctions are there because their God is their king, not other people's gods. So we're going to look different. We're just going to look different. They're supposed to look different. And so that explains a lot of sometimes it just looks and sounds bizarre to us. And they can sound bizarre to us, modern Americans. These are very ancient things. The laws that sound so random and bizarre to us are quite meaningful in their ancient context. We don't always know why they did that, had that prohibition, like not eating pork in Leviticus 11:7. Maybe it was for physical well-being, because they knew that pigs ate anything that they could get near. They thought this is disgusting. Maybe it's a physical thing. Probably a lot of times it is remind them not to practice the religious rituals of their neighbors. Like you don't cook a young goat in its mother's milk. I have never in my life been tempted to do that. Not yet. I'm pretty young, I guess, still. Jennifer told me it's weird when she does it, but I quote Deuteronomy 14:21. So it's one of those things we go, why would, hello, good morning. It's one of those things I would say, why would I do that? Well, because their neighbors did that sometimes in their rituals to show their worship of their foreign gods. We might look at, why would you care? Well, they did. And so when the Jews are told, don't do that, why? Because that's what they do. That makes their gods happy. It doesn't make Yahweh happy. We can go on a long laundry list. A certain people group, they thought that their gods liked babies being killed to them. They liked that. Chemosh and others, Yahweh doesn't like that. Their gods don't mind if you seek the advice of the dead, necromancy and diviners and soothsayers. Our God doesn't like that. He wants you to go to Him, not to dead ancestors. Don't do like they do. Down the list it goes. So we're not always told that's what other ancient cultures did. We try to, sometimes you have to deduce it. Other times we know that's what they did because we have other ancient literature or cuneiform or inscriptions that tell us what the other ancient cultures did. And we go, oh, that's what they said, don't do that. Sometimes we're just not sure why they said that. But that's why. It looks ancient, but that's what they're trying to get at. So law, a little tip, laws, plural, it can refer to the 600 plus individual commandments. It's probably, frankly, we don't, if you count them up, it's different. There are several hundred. Traditionally, there are 613, but that's just not true. It depends on how you count it up. It's with Yahweh. Sometimes laws refer to those individual commandments. Law can also refer to all the commandments collectively. Like, don't think I've come to abolish Jesus, abolish the law. Sometimes book of the law or book of Torah refers to the first books of what we call the Old Testament. Now, this footnote matters. The first 5 books of the Old Testament are, see OT, if you don't know this, OT is short for Old Testament, right? The first 5 books of the Old Testament are commonly called, it's really Torah, kind of like you say, it's a hard TH almost, Torah. Torah is from Hebrew, from Horah, which is the hip vowel form of Yara. Yara. So that's the ultimate origin of Torah is Yara. Well, Yara is a verb means to throw. To throw. So like if I had a pen here and I said, which way is it to Chicago? And I go that way, and I threw the pen. That's a Yahweh. I throw to show direction. And that's why you can translate hara, like to point out. To point out. Go that way. So someone might translate Torah as direction. The best translation of Torah is not law, but direction, guide, or standard. That is the best way to translate the word. Everybody knows anything about Hebrew. You're taught this early on. This is standard. And that's why we all go, for the rest of our lives, go, well, it shouldn't be called the law. That's not what Torah means. It just does not mean that. And then moreover, secondly, I've already told you, it implies it's a bunch of rules you got to follow or else. Well, some things are rules or else, some things are not rules or else, and so it's just misunderstanding. But as usual, I'm not the word police. I never correct a person. In the Mosaic Law, I don't go, no! And I won't do that to you either. I'm just letting you know, if you want to know what your Bible actually means, that's what it means. So, Torah typically refers to the first 5 books. Sometimes from the Latin to the Greek to the Latin, we say Pentateuch, which are the first 5 books. So what is a Jew called? Well, they don't call it the Old Testament. That's what Christians call it. There's nothing old about it to them. I mean, it's old, but they don't call it that. What do they call it? They call it the Tanakh. Tanakh. T-N-K. They just added some A's in the vowels. T-N-K. Tanakh. Why do they call it that? Because the three portions of what we call the Old Testament are called in Hebrew the Torah, T, the N of Tanakh. N is Navaim. Navaim is plural for prophets or spokespeople of God. And then you have the K, Ketuvim. Ketuvim means writings. Keta and Ketavim makes it plural. Navaim, prophets. Kethaim, the writings. So the Torah, the first 5 books, the prophets, and the writings. That's how Jews separate what we call the Old Testament. And so it's an acronym, TNK, and they say the Tanakh. In scholarship, little footnote in scholarship, we often call it the Tanakh because when you work in scholarship, which I'm not a professional scholar now, but in scholarship, you were to go with me to professional meetings, they oftentimes don't call it the Old Testament because it might sometimes sound anti-Semitic. Because if you're working in biblical scholarship, you're working oftentimes with fellow people who are New Testament scholars, Old Testament scholars, but they're Jews. And so you don't want to call it the Old Testament, like that's your Christian terminology. And so what we call it is Tanakh. Sometimes you call it the Hebrew Bible. That's pretty common too, to call it the Hebrew Bible. The problem with that is there's portions of the Old Testament that are not written in Hebrew, they're written in Aramaic, particularly in Daniel. And so that's also a misnomer, but that's pretty common too amongst Jews, the Hebrew Bible. As a Christian, I have no problem calling it Old Testament. In churches, I typically call that because no one knows what the Tanakh is, and I teach them, but at a school, they would know. Anyway, their background. Any question about that so far? About what the role of the guidance is, the role? Any question or comments about that? Okay, I'm assuming you're so excited and you get it. Christians are not expected to express their loyalty to God by keeping the Old Testament laws, since Christians are not under the authority of that anymore. They're under the authority of a different covenant altogether. Seventh-day Adventists believe we should keep all of them or most of them, but they do pick and choose. They discard chunks of them because we don't have a temple anymore. That goes all of Leviticus. So they're adamant about upholding the Old Testament. And I go, well, do you offer sacrifice at the temple? Well, no, that's different. Let's see. So they're still picking and choosing. But that's fine. It's just that, as I talked about when I did Acts, everybody in the primitive church, no. All of the earliest apostles and earliest disciples who followed Jesus would disagree with him. That Christians are not under that covenant. We go through Jesus, not the Old Testament. So how should we understand or appropriate the Old Testament? What are we going to do about it? Do we just burn it? Christians historically, some have said that. Some said we dismiss it altogether. There's a guy named Marcion who lived in the earliest, mid-late second, third century. He said that's exactly what we did. And so it was popular for a while at Christian churches to go, Marcion's right. Let's just get rid of the whole thing because it's worthless. And he's a mean old God anyway. He said go kill people. But in general, Christians said, no, that's too far. In general, they said that's too far. We shouldn't do that. So in general, they would have done as a few common beliefs or guidelines. The Christians have stored all the way back to the late second century. So this mid to late hundreds, there's a book called The Letter of Barnabas. And even then, early on, they started saying, what do we do with this Old Testament stuff since we don't do this anymore? So in general, first they would say is, the Old Testament law is a covenant with Israel and not Christians or America or English or the Chinese or North South Korea. It is with Israel. A covenant is like a marriage contract where each party in general, there's different kinds of covenants. I'm just saving time because this is an intro. It's like a marriage contract where each party makes vows to one another in an effort to establish and maintain a loving relationship. God did not make such vows with any other nation on the planet. He didn't get married to anyone else. And anytime you ever hear anything differently, please disagree with him gently and respectfully. It's just not true. They didn't. The law was for Israel to demonstrate that they had formed a loving relationship with Yahweh. Yahweh. At no point, I know, I've taught this for a long time, how emotional this can be. Based on any known record I've ever read or heard ever have I heard about God visiting a burning bush to George Washington, or coming down the mountains to give a brand new codes to John Adams. He just didn't do it. He never made a marriage with America. He didn't with Christians either. Jesus did not, just read the Gospels, he did not go around saying, the most important thing is to make sure you're reading your Leviticus well. Make sure your priest of the temple is just right. Make sure you're ritually clean and morally, make sure. No, he called people to himself. Now, he didn't cut it all off, but it's with Israel. And that helps us understand the right frame of mind when we're eavesdropping on a conversation with them. And then we say, does any of it apply at all? Maybe. Christians have historically separated the Old Testament laws into three categories. Ancient Jews tended not to do this much, but Christians, the earliest Jewish Christians, who look back on their, quote, Bible and go, well, then what do I do with it? This is what they did. So if you meet a common religious Jew on the street, is this how you break up your Old Testament? They're going to say, not really. I mean, they might a little bit, but not really. But Christians do. We break it into civil, ritual, and moral laws. They're not always easy to separate, but I think a lot of times it's pretty common sense. Civil laws have to do with penalties for various crimes for which one is to be arrested and taken to court in Israel. Now, none of these laws are applicable to Christians since we don't live in ancient Israel. And if you want, we can look at Leviticus 24:11 to 22. There's certain things, the civil things. So Jody's donkey is eating, doing his normal thing, and he happens to go too far with his leash breaks, and he goes on my property, and he falls down and his leg breaks, and now he can't work. Do I owe Jody money for her donkey breaking its leg in my property? Well, there's nothing moral. Jennifer said, no, there you go. There's your... So they would go to the local elder in town or the people at the front and go, what's the deal? So we have laws like that in the Old Testament. Just, we might call those civil laws. And then later on, those same kind of questions get brought up through the centuries, and they keep over and over and over. And so people eventually would be called rabbis, my great one, my teacher. Then they would make declarations on things like that. Civil laws. Then I think called ritual laws. These are laws have to do with what Israel was to do during worship, especially surrounding the sacrificial system. So when you think of ritual law, think sacrifice. This is the largest portion of the Old Testament, no doubt about it. And none of these laws are applicable to Christians since we don't access God through the ancient sacrificial system. We just don't. We just don't. So, for example, in Exodus 29, let's go to Exodus 29. For example, now this is what you all are to do for them, to consecrate them so that they may minister as my priest. These are a bunch of Aaron and his sons are about to be anointed to get ready to be a priest. Take a young bull and 2 rams without blemish, and bread without yeast, and perforated cakes without yeast, mixed with oil, and wafers without yeast, spread with oil. You are to make them using fine wheat flour. You're to put them in one basket and present them in the basket along with the bull and 2 rams. You're to present Aaron and his sons at the entrance of tent of meeting. You're to wash them with water and take their garments and clothe Aaron with the tunic, the robe of the ephod and the breastpiece. You are to fasten the ephod on him by using a skillfully woven waistband. You're to put their turban on his head and put the holy diadem on his turban. You're to take the anointing oil and pour it on his head and anoint him. You're to present his sons and clothe with the tunics and wrap the sachet on Aaron and his sons, put headbands and da-da-da-da. Okay, you see the point. This is all the stuff that you did before you went to have a sacrifice at the temple, right? Nobody in Christianity, of which I'm certainly a part, I don't think this is what it means to be the local pastor of your church. Needs to get bathed by the other local people and put on a special ephod and put on oil before I go sacrifice animals to make it to Hill Church. I mean, no one thinks that. But these kind of things are all through the Old Testament. Now, let me say something very important about this, because we do have a little extra time. You need to understand this, and if you haven't read Leviticus lately, or the book of Numbers or Deuteronomy, that's okay. 99 point whatever percent, if not 100%, of the sacrifices and offerings, there were offerings you gave to God. Not all offerings were sacrifices. Some of those are grain offerings, fruit offering, vegetable offerings. Or you could sacrifice animals. And there are different ways they did it. So if you read it carefully, they outline all the different kinds of sacrifices, all the different kinds of offerings. What they all had in common was these are ways to atone for, make right again, your relationship with Yahweh if you're a Jew, and only if you're a Jew, and 2, only if you accidentally broke the Mosaic law. The entire Mosaic law was predicated on the assumption that you knew what the rules were, and you broke them on accident, or you were ignorant and you broke it on accident, but you broke them on accident. So it's a way of God saying, I'll be merciful to you, I'll get you back, I won't kick you out of the community, you just need to do these kinds of things. Now, in the ancient world, everybody believed that the gods liked sacrifices and offerings. Everyone thought it. The Egyptians thought it. The Canaanites thought it. Babylonians thought it. Everybody. Everyone had sacrifices. Everyone had priests. What they did there was different, but they were similar. The difference was Jews said, yeah, but our God, Yahweh, is our king, and he likes us certain ways. And that demonstrates we only give he's our king, so we're going to do certain things just for him. Our honor is to him alone. However, If you meant to break the law, you knew it, and you broke it on purpose, no sacrifice for you, no offering for you. You were either killed or you were kicked out, excommunicated. You were no longer part of the covenant community. You're out. And you can read that like in the book of Numbers. It'll say, but if you do this, and then later on in Judaism they say, crimes of an open hand, a heavy hand. If you did it on purpose, you're out. So Leviticus, the Mosaic law, is chiefly for accidental violations. If it was on purpose, you're either killed or kicked out. Very strict. Yeah, pause there, yeah. Who made the distinction? You know, that's a good question. I'm going to have to do some more research. At the top of my mind, I can't think of any Bible verse that tells me who makes that distinction besides the offender. Besides the offender. I've always assumed, I can do more research on that. I can't think of a Bible verse that would tell me other than what I'm thinking right now, which is the offender would go to the temple and say, hey, I need to offer this dove and blah, blah, like it says in Leviticus 12. Why is that? Well, I found out I accidentally did blank. Right, they might not know it all because they don't have a Bible. They don't have that. They don't have all the rules, stipulations the same way we might. So all that to say, yeah, I would assume the offender herself. I mean, someone might say you need to do this. And there are also other things that are sacrifice offerings, like I said, for the ritual, but again, this answers your question too. I guess to be ignorant or someone has to tell them, hey, did you know? And you need to go do this. But that would include things such as, because ritual, we should not think always sin. We think ritual. How do I show my devotion to Yahweh? Sometimes it can be, well, again in a second, a moral sin, but typically it's some kind of violation. They just messed up. Or it's a normal process of normal human behavior, but you're still not in God's good graces, ritually speaking. They don't think you've sinned, but you're not ritually clean. So a perfect example is having a baby. You're ritually impure. If I remember, if a boy, you're unclean for 3 days. If it's a girl, it's 7 days. That's how highly they thought of females. When females are menstruating, you're unclean for, is it 7 days? If you're near a corpse. So then these people they don't get killed on the spot or kicked out. It's just, you have to think of ritual purity like a contamination. It's like getting on radiation. It gets on your skin or your whatnot. It gets near you. But radiation doesn't hate you. It just doesn't play well with skin. It doesn't play well with human cells. It's like that with God's presence. God's presence doesn't necessarily hate you. It's just if you're near it and you're not prepared in the right garb and the right get up and the right hazmat suit, it's going to get you. And so the only way to be fully prepared is to be ritually purified of these contaminants. And the only way to do that is to follow what we've told you, which is get a mikvah, a baptismal. You need to have a baptismal ritual, and you need to stay away from people for 7 days or 3 days, or stay away from the temple. And afterward, you're like a baby timeout. There's nothing wrong with you, it's just you're ritually impure. So that would include things in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, Numbers as well. So what if a teenage girl didn't know that? Well, their mom or dad has to tell them, hey, letting you know down the road when this happens, you'll be ritually impure. And if you didn't know that, now you got to go do this. And the assumption was particularly that fathers told them. You'll see that a lot in the Proverbs. So moms and dads both would tell them, but it was typically laid upon the father's responsibility. Is that what I'm asking? I think so. So like, for example, today you passed a guy, just for the camera, you passed a guy who was filling up a cooler. He wasn't on the way to church. So what about people in ancient Judaism who just accidentally broke laws, but they weren't headed? We simply do not have enough data to know what the average normal Jew did when this came out. We just don't. We don't have enough. I would suspect, we don't know. First off, we don't know for sure. We don't have enough. The data we do have was written centuries after the fact by the religious elite, writing about moral commandments that they wanted their current people to obey. And that's why historically it's very problematic to know how much we can use these exact verses to go back in time another 1,000 years to go. It tells more about the 6th century BC than it does 1500 BC because that's when they wrote it. How much was that exactly obeyed for those 1500? We just don't know. I think probably most scholars would say probably that the average Jew for centuries in ancient Israel and Judah were raised in a basic, we might say, law-observant home. And that in general, if you lived close enough to Jerusalem, you would go there when you can. You would give your sacrifices and your offerings according to the laws. And then you go back home and you're a farmer, or you raise goats, goat milk. And I mean, most people in the ancient world in this period, we would call them subsistence farmers. I mean, it was hand to mouth. These were not, you had the few wealthy people. But in general, the average farmer, you live with your family, and they live with their family. So you'd have usually about 2 to 3 to 5 generations live in the same clan, like a compound, and the tents got bigger and bigger, and they had kids and kids. So about 3 to 5 generations at one time, because afterwards they're too old, they would die off. So you might have a grandparent, great grandparent, maybe, because they had kids quickly when they were young, and they probably taught them, this is what Jews do, this is what makes God happy, and this we ought to do. And so in general, most people were not, I mean, priests were a small group of people who worked over in the temple. There were a lot of people now probably even met a priest till they go to the temple. How much they knew all these laws, we don't know. How often they really were stoned or excommunicated, we have very little evidence of that ever happening. We have, again, commandments. You need to drag them to the court and stone. If a woman's out there and she gets raped, it says, and she cries for help, then he's in trouble. But if she doesn't cry for help, that means they were in and on together, they should be stoned. I don't know of any story where they actually stoned a woman or a guy who had sex, fornication. I don't know any evidence for that. I don't know any evidence they got stoned for almost anything. It says you have a rebellious drunkard son, he should be stoned. We don't have any evidence they ever did that. So it's difficult to tell if these are exactly how they understood them. Are these, quote, we might call, are these literal stipulations? The second my son gets drunk, I've got to kill him on the spot? Some might go, yes, that's exactly what it meant. Okay, that puts a fear of Yahweh in you. I mean, it does to say, I'm not doing anything. And other scholars say, but no, David, the second one was the point. They would say, I think the point is, it was to put the fear of Yahweh in you. Don't do that. Later on, when we do have more writings of what Jews actually did, we have no evidence they did that. Later rabbis worked hard to interpret those verses to mean that's not what they really meant. So like we might call capital punishment, they would say, yeah, but, it's authoritative, yeah, but that doesn't mean that's what Moses meant. But later Jews did not go out of the way to go stone people left and right. They didn't. Sometimes wild things happen, sure. Mobs formed and people got killed, but in general, and that's what's difficult to answer your question exactly. No, that's a good point. It's like in Psalm 139, search my heart, mind. If there's anything I've done, purify me. That the average Jew might not have, have I done something, please? I think that's probably true. I think it's probably true. There were a lot of Jews like, please don't kick me out, or please don't. Yeah, it's probably true. Because we don't have much evidence to know that, again, we should not picture ever that an ancient Jew is walking around what we call the Old Testament. No, they didn't. They didn't. It wasn't until the Josiah's reforms, that's the late 6th century BC, he found the scroll of the law. Most scholars think that means what we call the Mosaic Law. Found it while he was doing renovations. Like, where had it been? And what were they doing back? And then all of a sudden it causes revival. And he goes, we should be doing this. Well, what were they doing before then? How many centuries went by when the average Jew was like, I'm sorry if I broke something. So that's the problem. I'm not saying it's not trustworthy. I'm just saying historically what happened, boots on the ground, that's very difficult to know. What we have is the final product of these laws written by people who were the religious elite about what should be done, about their vision of what should be done. So they're accidental violations, not deliberate, and that's it. Now later on, no, the point is Christians still don't go through that. Christians still don't say, whether it's accidental or not accidental, we don't go to God through Leviticus. We just don't do that. A little footnote, and it's little, and I'll move on. But that kind of excommunication from the community, we know things like that did happen from time to time. We know that because we have by the time we get to the 1st century, because we have evidence of things like that. And you see it in times like, for example, 1 Corinthians 6, or 1 Corinthians 6, when Paul is speaking about a guy who's sleeping with a stepmom. And he says, not only is he doing it, you're approving of it. What is wrong with you? You should kick him out of the community, hand him over to Satan so that he might be redeemed. By the time we get to 2 or 2 Corinthians, he doesn't say it's the same guy, but he says, that guy's repented, he feels horrible, bring it back in. So I believe, and most scholars do, what Paul is doing there is just good old Jewish synagogal discipline. Until you stop this sin, you're out of the community. Come back home. The assumption is they're going to want to come back. Please, I'm so sorry. Well, that assumption in most cultures today, and certainly in Christianity, does not work. It does not work. I can think of no example in my entire ministry career so far where someone says, I'm so sorry, you got to stop sinning, you should just leave here. And they go, I'm so sorry, I went back. They give them the bird, they cuss out the church, and never come back. Or they go down the street to the other 30 churches down the road. So it doesn't work like it used to work. It just doesn't. I've tried many, I'm kidding, I'm not trying. It doesn't work that way. Not the way, but in Judaism it did. Then there are moral laws. I got to move on. Then there are moral laws. They have to do with how people should care for others, maintain. I'll call it holiness. That's a long word too. Holiness does not mean be a good person. Holiness means I'm co-identified with God. In the Old Testament, utensils, spoons, altars, buildings, people can be holy. Spoons are not moral agents. Spoons don't grow in their sanctification. No. It means co-identify with God. It's much like saying my children are a Pendergrass. They are now Pendergrassed. They're holy. And so they need to act like it. It implies certain moral things, that's for sure. Now in the New Testament, when those things are upheld in the New Testament, then we do them. So everyone knows Deuteronomy 6:5 and Leviticus 19:18. Even if you don't know, you know it, you do if you're a Christian, because Jesus quotes those verses when he says, what's the greatest commandment? He says, back there are dos commandments. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. He quoted Deuteronomy 6:5, Leviticus 19:18. So historically, most Christians say, we don't obey Deuteronomy 6:5 because it's Deuteronomy 6:5. We obey Deuteronomy 6:5 because Jesus said so. Does that make sense to you? We don't obey Leviticus 19:18, love your neighbor as yourself, because it says so in Leviticus 19:18. It's because Jesus said, he quotes Leviticus 19. So I find that very persuasive. That's how I do it too. How do I know if any law applies to me today? It appropriates to me, it's authoritative, morally. Did Jesus or the church say it? And that's the next thing I'm saying here. In general, point number 3, Christians should assume that none of the laws are binding unless they are renewed or restated in the New Testament. That means very few laws are actually restated. For example, the 10 Commandments, we might call them. They're not called commandments in Hebrew. It's really the 10 words, the 10 statements. See, we like the word commandment and law and rule, and this is misleading. Decalogue means 10 words, 10 sayings. Anyway, so the 10 words, you can call 10 commandments. If you look them up, every time Jesus quotes from them, he doesn't quote all of them. He doesn't. He doesn't quote all 10. We go, so many Christians think our morality comes from 10. It doesn't. There's one commandment, one law Jesus doesn't mention at all. Do you know which one it is? Shabbat, Sabbath. He never says you have to obey the Sabbath. The other 9 he at some point quotes from, and that's why Christians don't murder and so forth. But even then, Jesus said, I know you've said not murder. I know you've heard that. Every Jew yeah, I've heard don't murder all my entire life. And he says, yeah, but I want you not to be angry with your brother. That leads to murder. I know you've heard it said don't commit adultery. Yeah, my whole life, Jesus. Every day in Jewish Sunday school. Yeah. But I want you never lust at a person. That's what leads to adultery. And so, all that to say, we need to look what Jesus said, and if he said it, great. That's good. And while his word isn't necessarily for us, it is for us, even though it wasn't to us. It just isn't. And I have a little quick here thing about tip about when Jesus says that the law will never pass away until all is accomplished, he's referencing at least God's intentions in the Torah to rescue humans from sin. That's like what God was trying to do through them to get them to stop sinning and to rescue them. He's not suggesting that every individual commandment is still binding on his followers as the sole means of demonstrating loyalty to God. I mean, he just did not mean that. Jesus and his Jewish disciples certainly followed Jewish laws. They probably did. But Jesus believed that he was accomplishing or fulfilling the law by his ministry, death, and resurrection. So the point is, we'd say, was it true that the law won't pass away until all is accomplished? Sure. Says who? Jesus. So says how? Jesus. So whatever he said and he did and how he lived and what he taught, he is the only and the exact accurate lens through which you should see the law. When you look at the law, put on the lens of Jesus and go, okay, whatever he said and did, that's the parts that matter to me now. That puts in focus, like blinders of a horse. That's the only part that matters the most, whatever he showed me and taught me. And when he mentioned the law through those lens, I'm with you. But it does not follow that every single thing they always did is binding. That's not what happened. He didn't teach that way. So, almost last but not least, anything about that? Question or comments about that? Doing a great job. Trying to stay awake. Doing a good job, Jody. Israelites did not consider the laws a means of salvation. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of church work in 26 years of ministry. The average Christian thinks, the average Jew thought they had to earn their salvation to God. The average Christian thinks that the average Jew thought, or still thinks, that they had to earn their salvation with God. That is patently false. It is patently false. You are hard-pressed to find any literature where any Jew goes, I just can't earn it good. Oh, I'm trying so hard to earn it. They really thought the law, that covenant, was just a gift. It's a gift to them. My king, the king of the universe said, I want to be your king. I'm going to find of all the Egyptians and Mesopotamians and Babylonians and Native Americans out there, I'm going to swear you. What, me? And they had a word for that. That's very gracious of you. You initiated a relationship with me, not because he needed Israelites to earn his love. That's not how it worked. They didn't, just like I don't earn my marriage, they didn't earn the relationship with God. So they didn't think the law was some onerous, horrible thing that, oh, I hate it, but rather I rejoice in it. I get to finally live the way the God of the universe wants me to live. Amy Jill Levine, she's a practicing Jew. She's a New Testament scholar at Vanderbilt. She's great, and I disagree with her a lot when she says anything that sounds not Christian in her interpretation, but she's really good. And she gives a really good analogy. She said, the average American, because she's very much, of course, American, and she said the average American, you live according to the Constitution every day, all the time. All the time. When you get in your car and you drive on the road and you pay your taxes, she said, every single day do you wake up and go, oh, I can't do it. It's too much, all the rules of the Constitution. It's so burdensome to me. Of course, no one does that. Nobody in their right mind does that. They go, yeah, I've chosen to live this way. I'm a citizen of the United States of America. Yeah, I've adopted these laws and these rules. I don't think for one second I'm earning my citizenship every day. I'm an American citizen. I can break the rules. Most people don't want to. Some people do it on accident. But what we don't do is think it's this horrible, wretched thing. We think it's a good thing. Most Americans are proud to be Americans, and they are proud, like, I'm glad that's my Constitution. That's probably a pretty accurate analogy of what ancient Jews thought. They still think that. Yep, good for me. God's good to me, gracious. The problem in the Old Testament was not their inability to keep the law. It was in their choosing not to do so. It was in their choosing not to do so. That's what the prophets spoke about over and over and over and over. It was not, I know it's tough, you'll never be able to do this, all these heavy, heavy rules. It's rather, why are you breaking the rules and you know you shouldn't be doing that? Or more specifically, the prophets don't always say the law. They use metaphors like, why are you cheating on God? He's a jealous God. Why are you cheating on him? And so by the time you get toward the later part of the Old Testament, well, there's going to have to be a time when his Spirit puts his law right on your heart and not on paper, stone, because he's got to transform your heart. You are rebellious. Jeremiah says, a stiff-necked people. Like a horse that don't want to move. Isn't that right, Jennifer? I know what they do? Or teenagers, the exact same. Stiff-necked teenager would work just as well as a horse. I'm not going. And that's what they criticize. The assumption was that you could do this if you tried, but most of you don't try, or a chunk of you don't try. And the prophets slammed the religious leaders the most. The most. So like with the narrative from last week, we should always ask of the laws, what does this tell me about God and what he's done in history? What's he doing? What's he doing in history? What does this tell me about how God worked the Old Testament laws? And there's, again, great do's and don'ts in the summary of the book itself. You can see that on the do's and don'ts. That's around page 180. That was the second edition. Fourth edition is a little different pagination. But any question or comments about the law? Anything? Good. So Jesus embodied the law. He was the perfect example of. I agree. He's the perfect example of what the law looks like in action, in the sense of loving God, loving neighbor, obeying Him, the kingdom of God. I agree. He's the perfect. He's it. And in the New Testament, there's one of the things they're so happy about, like the author of Hebrews, he's so happy, and his whole argument is the Old Testament laws, you had to do them all the time throughout the year. When you broke that rule and broke that rule, and it didn't last, you never felt your conscience, he said, was clear of, whew. He says, until Jesus. It's once and for all. It's done. You don't go back. We don't. It's absolutely against common modern Roman Catholicism. You don't have to keep going to Mass and to confession. That was settled on the cross. When I gave my life to Jesus, it's settled. That's the whole point of Hebrews. Like, you don't have to keep going back over and over and over. Jesus, it's all done. Nope. And now you really can be forgiven of sins, even if you did it on purpose. They didn't think that way. They said, yes, you can. Rebellious sins. Yep, Jesus forgives that. I will say pray for us, sir. We thank you, Lord Jesus, for the opportunity again to study your scripture. Please help us understand it and apply it well. Thank you for loving us. And thank you, Jesus, for exemplifying for us what it looks like to be a faithful citizen of the kingdom of God who obeys your rules and follows you perfectly. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.